For decades now, action video games have been placing different sorts of weapons in the hands of gamers, so they can blow away the enemy with maximum realism and efficiency. The goal being, of course, to deliver an immersive, believable experience that heightens the moment and just makes it more fun to engage with. Even back in the early 2000s, developers would go to fairly extensive lengths to maximize the realism of various firearms and explosives for various shooters and the like, recording real high-quality audio samples for the game to use for the corresponding weapons, scanning the weapons directly into the development software to use as super realistic assets, and even customizing enemy death animations to react differently to different types of weapons, all add up to just some of the many things that developers have been experimenting with over the years to make different weapons feel right and fun to use. In doing so, however, as is often the trade-off for video games, in order to keep upping the ante with making different things fun to use, they have also definitely overlooked many key elements of how these things actually work. Shotguns in particular are one of the main things that games seem to be drifting further away from in terms of realism. Here are just a few of some of the many things that games get wrong about shotguns. People don't go flying backwards like a cartoon character after being shot with a shotgun. We've seen it in countless movies, video games, and TV shows for years and years. And while enemies and bad guys flying backwards 6 feet and hitting the wall after being hit with a 12-gauge round does definitely look cool and makes you feel really powerful, it's not really how it happens. Guns don't really blow people backwards like a massive explosion might. As shotgun pellets or shotgun slugs penetrate the human body, plenty of damage is done, and it will absolutely stop any person, quite literally, dead in their tracks, especially at close range. But there aren't very many reasons to think it would actually make their body lift off the ground and fly backwards. Going through an object as fast and as powerfully as buckshot does tends to just make a hole the size of the spread. The shot will end up either in the body or whatever's behind the body, depending on what sort of shotgun and ammunition is being used. But generally speaking, you're not going to be pushing your target in any direction with it. Will they fall down? Yes. Will they fall backwards? Likely. But causing them to fly into the back wall is an effect that movies and games basically invented out of thin air, and isn't something that shotguns actually do. Now, if you were to hit somebody with extraordinary body armor on and shoot them with the most powerful type of buckshot from the most powerful type of shotgun right in the center of their body, you might start to get an effect that resembles a little bit of that, as the force from the shot would likely have nowhere else to go and just transfer the momentum to the target being hit. But outside of scenarios like that, it wouldn't really work that way. Humans are made of skin, meat, organs, and bone, all of which are far more likely to give way to the force of a slug or shotgun pellets than resist that force and cause the body to fly backwards. If games suddenly started reflecting this, it might not look nearly as cool, but it would be more realistic. Another, more complicated area that games tend to gloss over with shotguns is how the spread works. Shotgun spreads aren't always super wide. This is an area that can get a little murky, as some birdshot varieties don't spread out as much as others, while some types of buckshot spread a lot more than others, and shotgun slugs, of course, don't spread at all, as they are a single object instead of a bunch of pellets. Many times, a game that has multiple shotguns does take a more realistic approach and might have different spreads depending on the model of shotgun. And this is something some gamers might criticize, but in reality that is actually much closer to reality than just every shotgun having the same type of spread. As we touched on earlier, different gauges or size of shotgun barrels exist that are designed for varying degrees of powerful ammunition. On top of that, each type of shotgun can use different types of shells, whether it be birdshot, which tends to have more smaller pellets, and buckshot, which has less but bigger pellets, or slugs, which are essentially giant bullets for shotguns whose design enables them to create their own spin as they leave the barrel so they can replicate the effect of a shot from a rifle. While games rarely seem to go into any detail about what gauge and ammunition type are being used in each shotgun, and just boil it down to variables like range, power, capacity, etc., having different models of shotguns reflect different degrees of spread is actually a step in the right direction, and it's something that many other games totally gloss over. Games like Uncharted will largely give you the same type of spread regardless if you're using a long 12 gauge or a small one-handed short barrel type of shotgun, despite the fact that these two types would probably be using wildly different shells and thus have different types of spread. The stopping power of any given shotgun is also subject to these characteristics, as birdshot is not going to stop somebody from 20 yards away nearly as well as buckshot or slug would. Games don't really specify what type of ammo is being used, so they just assign these characteristics to the gun as a whole and leave it at that, which isn't even half of the factors you need to consider when using shotguns. One particularly troublesome myth about shotguns in games, as well as shotguns in real life, is that aiming just isn't all that important. Just point your gun in the general direction of a target and boom, your enemy is down and you're good to go. This is not only wrong, but could mean the difference between life and death if it's applied in real life or something. The truth is that while yes, shotgun spread is slightly more lenient on accuracy than, say, a .22 pistol would be, that doesn't mean that you don't need to aim. The average spread of a shotgun is only a few inches, and can often be less than that. Again, depending on the type of ammunition being used. It's true that there are some types of ammunition that make a point to achieve as much spread as possible, but even with that particular type of ammunition, if your target is more than 10 feet or so away, your odds of hitting it without aiming down the sights properly are still about as good as they are with anything else, which is to say, not very. These ultra-wide targeting sight markers that shooters tend to give shotguns are often far too generous and are likely a product of this myth floating around in the real world for many years before games started having shotguns in the first place, and it's just not true. Now, while there are plenty of other things that games tend to gloss over with these types of firearms, most everything stems from these few issues. When games don't specify the type of gun or ammunition being used, it's hard to say how realistic they are or aren't, but the fact that they don't specify alone is cause to point out the inaccuracy, as those elements can vastly alter how the shotgun works and whether or not it would be a good choice for any given situation. Aside from that though, enemies flying back several feet as if they were hit by a gust of wind from a hurricane, and the idea that aiming is optional for them to be effective, are more than enough proof that games have a little ways to go if their goal is realism with shotguns. That said, just as with any of these lapses in realism, the goal of any game should be to be fun, and unless you're really drilling down on realism for a deliberate reason, glossing over these finer details in exchange for a more streamlined gaming experience certainly makes sense, and I, for one, hope it stays that way for most games. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.